Welcome, everybody, to Congregation Va-Dor's Touch of Torah. And tonight, I'm pleased to see that we have Rabbi Barry Silver, our spiritual leader of Va-Dor, and guest Rabbi Ed Rosenthal, who's from the west coast of Florida and is known as the Rabbi of the Reef. And take it away, gentlemen. They'll be talking tonight about Deuteronomy EKEV and about all the Tikkun Hayam that Rabbi Ed does.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here tonight. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Rabbi Rosenthal, for joining with us. Rabbi Rosenthal runs an organization that I love the title, I love the purpose, love everything about it. It's called Tikkun Hayam. Instead of Tikkun Olam, which is fixing the world, it's repair of the seas and the ocean, Tikkun Hayam. Thought he'd be a great guest to have on with us today. And also we can talk a little bit about Ekkeb, about the Torah reading. Rabbi, would you like to lead the discussion about Ekkeb?
Sure, let me, I had it here just a second ago. Let me pull that back up. The text is very interesting in so many ways. Does everybody have it nearby, perhaps?
No, we're relying on you.
Okay.
Do you want me, Ed, do you want to share your screen for anything?
I could do that.
I can make you co-host. Give me a second. Okay. So you can share your screen now.
Okay. So it begins, Moses continuing his discourse. Remember, Deuteronomy is the preparations for entering into the land of Israel. Moses is giving his final discourse. And the whole thing is pretty much, if you do this, then you'll be rewarded. If you don't do this, you're going to be punished. Reward and punishment is a funny concept. And, we can talk a little bit more about it. But to get a sense, we can start. And I guess we'll do the English. Is that okay with everyone? Or do you want the
Sure.
Hebrew? What does everybody prefer?
Go with the English.
All right. Would somebody like to read? We're Deuteronomy chapter 7, beginning verse 12. Anybody want to read that? Vahaya Ekkeb.
Sure, I'll read that. Okay. So starting with verse 12, and it shall come to pass, because ye hearken to these ordinances and keep and do them, that the Lord thy God shall keep with thee the covenant and the mercy which he swore unto thy fathers. And he will love thee and bless thee and multiply thee. He will also bless the fruit of thy body and the fruit of thy land, thy corn and thy wine and thine oil, the increase of thy kind and the young of thy flock in the land which he swore unto thy fathers to give thee.
Okay, you can carry on a little bit more. We're just getting the gist of it, basically.
That shall be blessed. Thou shalt be blessed among all peoples, above all peoples. There shall not be male or female barren among you or among your cattle. And the Lord will take away from thee all sickness, and he will put none of the evil diseases of Egypt, which thou knowest, upon thee, but will lay them upon all them that hate thee. And thou shalt consume all the peoples that the Lord thy God shall deliver unto thee. Thine eye shall not pity them, neither shall thou serve their gods, for that will be a snare unto thee.
Okay, that gives us the general gist of it. So I guess my question is, how do you feel about that? I mean, it's really interesting because clearly not all there are amongst us who are barren. Clearly there are amongst us who have not received the fullness of all of this quote unquote promise. When you read this, how do you feel about it? What are your thoughts?
Well, what do you think about it? That's why we have you.
Oh, that's why you. Well, you've got a question here because it goes into the issue of reward and punishment. And here, I'll stop sharing since we get the gist. That's what it is. Reward and punishment is such an interesting concept. I learned from a rabbi who said that reward and punishment is probably the greatest bastardization of any religious teachings. Because it's basically saying, God says, do this, and I'll reward you, do that, and I punish you. And, is that the way? I'm not gonna, I won't necessarily share my theological views, but
Well, that's what you're here
What is
for.
it?
We want to hear your theological views. What
I mean,
are they?
do I see, I don't see a God who sits up in heaven. You know, my mother, she should rest in peace, thought God was an old man with a long white beard on the top of Mount Sinai. And I told her, Mom, I was there. Trust me, he's not. So it's a challenge that I think we all face, because we're taught one thing as children, but as adults, we know free will. I mean, is it really one of these things, this infinite, this deity, this entity? I mean, I'll say this, I personally don't even like the word God, because it presents an anthropocentric concept. And as soon as we hear God, people tend to think, well, humans are created in the image of God. Well, really? I mean, does that mean God is a male? God is a female? Is God, when we say we're creating the image of God, it's like, well, that means my image, I mean, because that's how I see it. So is that really what we're thinking? So the question of a deity rewarding or punishing, I mean, my personal view, I accept the idea that more along the lines of the Kabbalistic concept of the Ein Sof, that there is an infinite, endless emanation of energy, that, call it higher power, call it a divine source, whatever you want to call it, that is everything, but not as we understand everything, because we have our limited human capacity. And if that's the nature of this divine being, to put human characteristics that, oh, if you do this, you'll be rewarded. If you eat this, you'd be rewarded. If you eat that, you're going to be punished. You know, I don't believe that my actions are going to influence this entity that, as the Kabbalists describe it, is everything that ever is, was, or ever will be, and it's non-corporeal and its metaphysical spiritual state. I don't think that my actions are going to warrant reward or punishment, other than how I behave. In other words, you know, if I stick a paper clip in an electrical outlet, you know, the electricity in the outlet doesn't change. You know, it's my behavior which brings about the result of the action. So as I read this text of, you do this, you get rewarded, you don't do that, you get punished, I have serious problems with it. I have serious problems with the text in general in this context. So
does the text mean nothing to you and we should ignore it, or is there some way to salvage some meaning from it?
It's a great question. I think what we salvage is an understanding of free will, meaning whether it's, you know, you get into the question of whether you're observing these mitzvot and they bring you reward, or you don't observe these mitzvot and they bring you punishment. I think the question is more along the lines of being cognizant of our actions. Our actions are what bring about reward. Our actions are what bring about punishment. And I read it as a guide which says, do the right thing. And if we look at our tradition from the perspective of mitzvot, yeah, there are mitzvot. You do certain things and they will, I believe, bring good. Love your neighbor as yourself. You know, honor your father and mother. Don't bear false witness. I mean, I believe that by observing mitzvot, we bring good into the world. And I think that's what this parsha is telling us. You know, I have serious problems when it talks about despoiling those who are already in the land, or when the Torah talks about committing genocide. I have real problems with that. And I can't reconcile that. I mean, I don't have all the answers, so I can't say. But I think that this is
you can't say if it's right or wrong. Is that what you're saying?
No, I can say that it's wrong.
Okay.
But I can't say it's wrong, but I can't reconcile the text, is what I'm saying.
All right. Well, your views are similar, very similar to the philosophy of Va-Dor, and to my views, in that we reject the God of the Torah as fiction. We reject the concept that there's somebody out there that you have to do his bidding and then you'll be rewarded. And if you don't, you'll be punished. This is a very primitive concept. It's kind of like if you have a child and the child's 3 years old and you can't reason with him, you have to tell the child, okay, if you do this, you'll get candy. And if you don't do this, you'll get a spanking. And they're not capable of reasoning. And so when they get older, hopefully, you will teach them to internalize doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, because it'll bring about a good effect. And if you do the wrong thing, it'll have negative consequences. So the Torah you could look at as our first effort to try to understand morality. Morality on a very extremely primitive level, which happens to bear a striking resemblance to the Assyrian, Hittite, lord-vassal relationships of that era. When they lived in that milieu, there was a lord over vassals, and the Lord said to the vassals, if you do my bidding and obey me and pay obeisance to me, I will reward you and I'll protect you and things will be well. If you cross me, I'll kill you. And the Torah seems to be based on that. From our lights in cosmic Judaism, we don't try to reconcile genocide. We reject it and repudiate it as an early stage of Judaism that no longer holds sway. The way to make it work today, it's called Ekkeb. Ekkeb means heel, and it means literally on the heels of. It means if you do this, this will happen. If you do that, this will happen. Ekkeb is trying to say if you do certain things, you'll be rewarded and certain things punished. God was seen as the supreme lawgiver, and he was anthropomorphic, as Rabbi Rosenthal says. But we believe that the concept of God has evolved. So he's not the supreme lawgiver, it's the supreme law. It's the physical laws that govern the universe. Basically what they're saying is, if you put a lot of toxins or CO2 into the atmosphere, there's going to be a negative result. The physical laws are going to cause the climate to change, to grow warmer, and you'll suffer the consequences. If you dump plastics into the ocean, you're going to get a bad result. If human beings treat the earth as if it's a commodity to exploit, then the source of life will no longer be able to sustain life as it does. As far as how you treat human beings, if you're kind to others and treat them with peace, usually that'll come back at you. If you create a society with overflow of assault weapons, with assault weapons that permeate society, you'll probably end up with a lot of mass killing. It's all about cause and effect. And so the passage teaches us much if we learn the principle from it and consider that we've evolved from that early stage, but we can still derive principles from this passage and from the Torah. Does that resonate with you, Rabbi Rosenthal?
Yeah, it does. As I was saying, it's free will. As you say, if you do these certain things, you bring bad things into the world. If you do other things, if you don't put the plastics in the ocean, you don't emit the CO2, you don't do all these things, you don't put the guns out. I see it as free will. We have the free will. And I think what I see what the Torah is telling us is you have free will to choose. If you do certain things, I'm not talking about what's literally the text, but exactly what you were saying. We choose to do things or we choose not to do things. And the choices that we make, the free will that we exercise, determines whether we are instruments of good or whether we are instruments of negativity. And I believe that every individual brings something to the table. You know, one little thread can't tow a truck, but a million little threads wound together create a very strong rope. And if everybody is working in the concept of doing good, it can change the world. And I see that as free will and the choices that are presented before us. You know, I think with regard to what you said before about the Torah, I mean, I see Torah in a different context. I see Torah in the context of a progression and a hierarchy, so to speak. So, like, I rarely view the Torah on its literal level. I mean, to me, there's always something to learn. There's no question. There's always something to learn, good and bad. But I think, you know, working with college students for as long as I have, I see the Torah as basically the Cliff Notes. It's, you know, you read something in the text, you say, that doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand it. So what do? I go look elsewhere in the tradition to see what other rabbis, other philosophers, other thinkers in our tradition who are far wiser and far smarter than I, to see what they have to say about it and see what they, and I learn it. So Torah to me is, it's the whole pardes. I mean, there's a hierarchy and each level offers new insights and new opportunities to learn on a deeper level. So when I read this text, I'm not looking at it at that literal level because I see it as part of a much greater whole, which is, but basically, if I can say, the culmination of our tradition and the wellspring, you might say, of a tremendous heritage of learning and arguing. I think it's wonderful and really fantastic that the Torah, that our tradition, the Talmud and other texts, so don't say this is the way it is. In the Torah, yes, Torah says do this, don't do that. But when you start getting into the other aspects of our tradition, rabbis disagree. And I love the fact that dissenting views are shared. And I think there's just so much to be learned in so many different areas. But like I said, I just don't read the Torah on its literal level like that. There are some things that you do if you want, but I don't, not for me.
Well, neither of us take the Torah literally. The difference is, though, that there are certain parts of the Torah that I think it's very important that we reject.
Yeah, but I think there are also parts that we accept. I accept certain
I'm
parts.
not, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that we reject the entire Torah. I'm a rabbi.
Yeah.
I read the Torah every week. I'm not suggesting that we reject the entire Torah. What I said was there are certain parts of the Torah that we reject. I indicated in my opening statement, we accept the premise of Ekkeb. Ekkeb means the heel, on the heels of, and it's saying that if you do certain things, it will produce a certain result. What Ekkeb is trying to say is that the results are axiomatic, that the universe operates in a certain fashion because of certain rules and laws. What I'm saying is that those rules and laws are the laws of physics and the laws of human nature, and that we've evolved beyond thinking that these are some supernatural being who actually is going to punish. We call these, in psychological terms, natural consequences. If you do certain things, there will be a natural consequence. And if you do other things, there will be another natural consequence that's wrong. But I think it's extremely important to say what it is that we accept and what it is that we reject. Why do I say that? Because the Torah is saying in this passage, and in many, many others, if you notice, it says that if you do the things that I'm telling you, you will conquer and defeat your enemies. You will destroy them, and you should not have any pity on them. I don't say that we should consult the rabbis and find out what the rabbis of old might have thought about that. Because I can tell you what the rabbis of today think about that. I've spoken to many, many, many Orthodox rabbis who think that that is correct. They accept.
Oh, but I think those are. I'm
genocide.
not talking about. I'm talking about looking to what rabbis say about other aspects of it. What are other lessons to learn? Not Orthodox rabbis of today. There are many who take it literally, and I reject that. I want to see when there are passages that I reject. I want to see if there's other lessons to be learned from it that are totally unrelated. And I have to admit, I haven't had the opportunity yet to delve deeper into the parsha for this week to see if there are other lessons to be learned, not about genocide, but other aspects. So, I mean, there are a lot of examples, other examples where we can look to see.
The lesson to be learned is that there are things in the Bible that are primitive, barbaric, archaic, and should be rejected and repudiated. And if we fail to do that, then we will continue to kill each other over ancient literature. Today, there are
I agree.
Let me just finish the point.
Sure.
There are many Jewish people today that I've spoken to, usually of the Orthodox ilk, who justify genocide. I've asked them about that. I say, what do you make of this passage? And they say, well, there's just certain people that need to be wiped out because they're going against God's laws, and God ordered genocide, and I agree with that. I think that's proper, that certain people have to be eliminated because they're doing the wrong thing. So now you have Jewish people today who are justifying and rationalizing genocide, the type of genocide that people committed against us using the same rationale. These Jewish people, we need to wipe them out. And I'll go a step further. The fact that Jewish scripture has passages about a God who orders genocide, and Jews today are still approving it, is the part of the reason why Christians and Muslims have used passages like this in their Bible to justify genocide against Jews and others. There are Muslims today who attacked on 9/11 and are saying that God told us we should kill people. So who are we? What moral authority do we have as Jews to say, whoa, wait a minute, you can't kill people in the name of religion? They turn around and they say, well, wait, your Bible says that, and some of your Jewish people are still justifying it. We just disagree on who's the ones who should be wiped out. My opinion is that we who brought the Bible to the world should set the record straight and say, we reject it. I don't want to learn from it. I don't want to apply it. I don't want to rationalize it. We reject genocide. We reject saying you have no pity on people. We reject it in our Bible. You should reject it in your Bible. And let's accept all the loving parts. And let's draw a line in the sand and not be morally ambivalent and just say, this part was not written by God. I reject it.
No, this is, I mean, what you're espousing is basically the original principles of Reform Judaism, where we reject those aspects of the Torah which are particularistic or which are clearly anathema to modern sensibility, and that we accept, and I will say this, as divinely, whether you want to think of it as divinely inspired or however you want to view it according to your own personal theology, as coming from the divine, those which are universal ethical mitzvot. And that's the foundation of Reform Judaism. So that's what you're basically espousing, which I have no problems with.
So you agree with my synopsis?
I agree with regard to things like, yes. Yeah. Look, I don't reject the concept of the divine or God. I don't think of it in the anthropocentric concept that so many people view it. So for example, when you talk about the laws of nature and the laws of physics, of course I accept the laws of nature and the laws of physics, but I don't separate the laws of nature and the laws from physics from the divine, if that makes sense.
And nor do I. Well, what we espouse at Va-Dor is a theory about Judaism and religion, originally formulated by Einstein and by Sagan. Einstein said that the concept of God has gone through 3 phases. At first, we saw a lot of violence and destruction, lightning and thunder and earthquakes and disease and famine. And we thought God was really scary and angry and wanted death. So we gave him death. We sacrificed animals, sometimes people, to satisfy his bloodlust. And then we thought maybe he'd leave us alone. That was the first stage. And that's what you see in those aspects of Ekkeb, which we reject. Later on, Einstein said God was perceived not as just an angry figure, but as a father figure, someone who would reward the good and punish the bad. And you see that in Ekkeb. He's going to reward the good and perceive the bad. Then Einstein said that later on, we're just entering that phase. We haven't quite got there yet, but we get glimpses of it. We have a different concept of God. He's not angry. He's not a father figure. It's not an anthropomorphic figure at all. What God is the laws of the universe. It's the physics of the universe. It's the awe and the wonder and the sense of the numinous in the universe. It's the miracles of everyday life. He said you can live life as if every day is everything's a miracle or nothing's a miracle. He perceived everything as a miracle. And he said sometimes you're just filled with a sense of awe and wonder at the universe. And the more you know of science, the more you feel it. And he called that a cosmic religious experience. Not unlike what our ancestors experienced, but they didn't quite understand what was going on. And so we don't reject God, and we consider God to have evolved, and we have a current understanding of God that squares with science and with Jewish ideals and with our highest hopes.
I
and
guess what I would say is I don't think God has evolved. I think humans have evolved.
No, it's
And I
not God.
understand-
God has not evolved.
Well,
It's
you just said
our
God. You said God has
understanding.
evolved.
It's
Our
our
understanding of God.
understanding,
Yes.
our concept of God, our understanding and concept has evolved. God, there's no change in the laws of physics. It's always the same. Our concepts, as we've evolved, as we've learned more and more, and as we've matured as a species and as a people, our understanding has evolved.
Yes, I agree 100%. 100%.
All right. Does anybody want to weigh in on this? Anybody else want to get involved in this? And then we'll go on to other topics. Go ahead, Sharon.
The only thing I wanted to say is when you were talking earlier, Rabbi, well, I thought that both of you were on the same page anyway, you know, even though you went round and round and round a couple times, but I think you were both on the same page. But one of the things you said, Rabbi, was something about evil and good. And in my mind, I was thinking like mafia kind of a thing, you know, where if you don't do what I'm telling you to do, I'll watch over you, I'll protect your store, I'll take care of you or your families. But if you don't follow me, if you don't give me money each week, I'm going to shoot you and kill you and put the horse in the bed and all that stuff, you know? So I was thinking of that when you were saying it. And I just thought I had to.
You're right. It's the same thing. It's the mafioso. It's the celestial dictator in the sky. It's the celestial Donald Trump. You cross me and I'll go after you. You do what I want and I'll reward you. It's the dictator, the celestial fascist in the sky. You're right. It's just like a mafioso guy, and it's laughable and it's primitive. And fortunately, we've outgrown it. But I like to think that we don't have to throw out the baby with the holy water. We can extract something positive from this Ekkeb, the law of cause and effect. We have control over our life. As Rabbi Rosenthal says, we have the ability to exercise free will. It's not necessarily a guarantee, but there are certain laws that are inscrutable that are going on. And if we try to understand those laws and act in harmony with them, we'll do good things. Which brings us to the environmental issue. We've clearly abandoned any effort as a species to understand the laws of nature and of the environment and to try to live in harmony with it. We've acted as if these laws don't exist or we're above them and we can disregard them. And the consequences are catastrophic. We have not learned the law of Ekkeb, of cause and effect. And the law of cause and effect in the Bible even says if you don't do the right thing, it'll be like acid rain. The rain will come down and it'll be discolored and it won't fertilize your fields and you won't have food to eat. It's really a prescription for what happens if you abuse the environment, what's the consequences that will be. How do you see that?
I think Peter wants to chime in.
To say something.
Go ahead, Peter.
Okay. So Barry, I really came into this meeting at the right time because what you said before is so accurate. Now, this is a matter of viewpoint and opinion. If you get enough people to agree about what you stated about how God should be, the concept of God should be viewed, the viewpoint, the point from which it should be viewed. Just give me a second. I know the point I want to make. What I'm saying, in other words, is that your ability, you never cease to amaze me because I am in 100% agreement with you, and I don't need 101% or 110%. 100% will do perfectly. I am in such agreement with you that you have to raise your intellect up to a point. People are walking around with a belief down here, but if you raise your intellect up to here, you'll think like you. I agree with you. God, the concept of God, it's here on earth, there's plenty of evil. And, evil takes a bit of confronting, and people don't want to even deal with evil, but evil occurs, school shootings, etc. I mean, this is the history of man. But the way you thought, I'm really happy that I heard what you said because I agree with you. I have the same viewpoint as you. God is not someone who sits in a gilded chair up in the sky looking down and we drop to our knees and put our hands together and pray. It's it's a level of intellect. And that's what I wanted to add. So I'm in total agreement with you.
Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you for your kind words. Really, all it takes is the application of reason and logic and science to religion, which is almost never done, but which was recommended by Einstein and Sagan. And then you can separate out the fact from the fiction and see what squares with science and reason and what doesn't. And then you'll see that the concept of God has been evolving all along. Thank you so much for your kind words. Anybody else want to share some comments? All right. Rabbi, why don't you tell people what you're doing with,
Sure.
With Tikkun Hayam?
With Tikkun Hayam, I've just a little bit of background. I've been working for Hillel for the past 23 years. I was a congregational rabbi before that. And so I've been working with college students for a long time. And it's fantastic work. I loved every minute of it, working. And the only problem is that my congregants never got any older. I was the only one that got older. They stayed 18 to 22 years old. And I just kept getting older. But one of the things which is really special about working with students is the level of innovation and creativity that you have to come up on a constant basis, because they change so quickly. And I mean, I've got a 4-year generation. At Va-Dor, you have exactly that. Va-Dor, you've got multi-generations and you see this progression. In college, I've got 4 years. And so I have to come up with the different ways to engage a broad swath of students, because when people join a particular congregation, they join a congregation that fits with them, where they feel at home, where they feel they're with people that they empathize with and like-minded views and the like. Whereas with college students, people from different backgrounds, attitudes, just all get thrown together in the mix. And so it requires a really broad range of opportunities. So a long time ago, as a means by which to engage students who wouldn't normally come to Hillel programs, when they first started Birthright, the application process students had to fill out what are outside interests. And I was really surprised to see how many students said they were scuba divers. And as a scuba diver myself, I thought, okay, well, this is a great way to engage students in a new way if they're not coming to Hillel. So I started a Jewish scuba club when I was at Emory University, and I called it Scooby Jew. And it was nothing more than, because I'm of the mindset that any activity becomes a Jewish activity when Jews do it together. So people said, what's Jewish about scuba diving? I said, nothing, until you get Jews scuba diving together, and it's great. Then it's a Jewish activity. So Scooby Jew was a wonderful program, and I did it when I was only at Emory for 2 years. Then I was the Hillel director at Cornell for 8 years, and I did it there as well. But when I came to Tampa Bay, one of my schools, a very small liberal arts college that very few people have even heard of, called Ekkeb College, which didn't even have a Hillel at the time. So nobody was there because of Jewish life. Their biggest major, it's a small school with only 1,800 students, maybe 100 Jews, but their biggest major was marine biology. And so it forced me to, I said, oh, Scooby Jew would be great at Ekkeb College. Well, the students were already divers. Of the 100 Jews, about 30 of them were certified scuba divers. So they didn't need me to bring that to them. So I had to find a way in which to add a new dimension to their already existing passion for the sea. So it forced me, no pun intended, to do a deep dive into our tradition, to see what is the relationship between Judaism and water? What's our relationship between Judaism and the sea? And how do we apply teachings from our tradition to our current situation? And so it was an amazing experience. And I think similar to the way Rabbi Silver was speaking before, our program has really been guided by the words of Carl Sagan from his book, The Demon Haunted World, where he said the notion that science and spirituality are mutually exclusive does a disservice to them both. And so my students were learning the science of the marine environment, and I'm not a scientist, so that wasn't my responsibility. That's the responsibility of their professors to teach them about the marine environment. My job as the campus rabbi was to teach them awe for it. and to teach them the wonders of it as presented through our tradition. And so as I really delved deeper, and as we were discussing before, I rarely look at the Torah on its literal level. But when you start delving deeper into other aspects of our tradition, and you see, for example, I've been a student of Kabbalah for the past, 30 years. And I see the Kabbalah not as a lot of people see it as, oh, it's superstition. I mean, the Reform view is, it's superstition, it's nonsense, it's mythology. To me, the Kabbalah is the spiritual teachings of Judaism. Again, like Torah, not all of it, but there's tremendous spiritual teachings in it. And when it comes to the question of water, what I found in the Kabbalah about water was, to my way of thinking, so profound that I had to share it with my students. And I can say that in 35 years in the rabbinate, this program has really turned out to be the most spiritually fulfilling program I've ever done. We do things like underwater meditation on the Shema. The Shema, as we all know, is about the unity of God, unity of the divine, and however you view that. And, it's interesting because along the lines of what we were discussing, maybe I'm going to be using different terminology than you would use, Rabbi Silver, but the Kabbalistic understanding of what is referred to as Ha'or Ein Sof, the infinite light, the primordial cause of everything, is this infinite, endless emanation of energy that contains within it everything that ever is, was, or ever will be in its non-corporeal state, in its non-physical state. And then the issues of, I normally teach a 14-week introduction to Kabbalah course, so I'm not going to get it all in just a few moments. But within the context of the Ein Sof, according to the Kabbalah, is everything in its spiritual essence. And the physical world, according to the Kabbalah, is a reflection of that greater essence. And so in a 3rd century text called Sefer HaBahir, which addresses the spiritual aspects of creation, not the physical aspects of creation, but the spiritual aspects of creation, the Sefer HaBahir asks the question that if everything in this world is an illusion, as Einstein said, this world is an illusion. As Einstein continues, said a very persistent illusion, but illusion nonetheless. If everything in this world is an illusion or a reflection of that ultimate reality, which we don't connect to, what then in this world is a reflection of the infinite light, the Or Ein Sof? Call it the divine, call it whatever you want. And Sefer HaBahir was explicit. It said, Or HaChayim Shamayim. The light in this world is the life of water. And so one of the things that I've been looking at in great detail is from a scientific perspective. When the Torah says, as I said before, I have real problems with the concept that humans are created in the image of God, because humans don't have one unified form. There are males, there are females, there's non-binary, there's black, there's white, there's brown, there's yellow. There could be purple polka dot for all I know. Humans are not a uniform image. And so to say that we're creating the divine image, in my perspective, that leads to bigotry, that leads to hatred, that leads to the concept that I'm better than others. So I reject the concept that humans are creating the divine image. And so I go back to Sefer HaBahir. If in this world, the reflection of the light is water, the life of water, you'll often see in Torah the term Mayim Chaim, living water, which can also be translated as life is, or water is life. But HaChayim Shamayim is a different concept. That's the concept that water is alive, that it's the life of water, and the life of water is the reflection or the manifestation in our world of that divine light. And when you look at it in that context, and you realize that the human body, depending on your age, is 60 to 70% water. If you're younger, you've got more water. If you're older, as most of us know, we dry out a bit. So 70% water is a human body. That doesn't matter if you're male, if you're female, if you're black, if you're white, if you're yellow, if you're brown, makes no difference. The human body is 70% water. Every living being is mostly made up of water. The planet is 70% water. The troposphere, where our climate is created in the atmosphere, is 70% water. Water is the only substance on the planet that exists naturally in all three states of liquid, gas, and solid. So when we think in terms of, and even the terminology that we use with regard to the divine, Michaye Hakol, Hamakom, the omnipresent one, the all-powerful one, the one that gives life, all of these the infinite one, all of these concepts, when you look at them, apply to water. Water is, it changes, they say that you can either create nor destroy matter, it just changes its form. If I burn a log, it's going to be turned into ash and carbon, and it will never reconstitute as a log. Water will evaporate from its liquid form into its gaseous state, and it's still water. And that gas will become solid in the form of a snowflake or a hailstone, or it will freeze, and it's still water. It's the only substance which exists in this world naturally in those three states. There are so many scientific anomalies to water that science can't even explain. And why is water the only substance that when it freezes, it gets lighter? Every other substance, when it freezes, it gets heavier. Water is the only thing that gets lighter. And by getting lighter, it allows life to live. Because if water followed the same patterns as every other liquid, when a lake up north froze, it would freeze from the bottom up, not from the top down, which would kill any life within the lake. So there are all these anomalies. And so when I see all of this, and I see that, and we talk about the Shema, there's no more unifying force on the planet than water. It transcends all racial boundaries. It transcends all religious boundaries. Every Jew is mostly water. Every Muslim is mostly water. Every Christian is mostly water. So it transcends everything. And it's that ultimate unifying force. And I tell my students, if you take an eyedropper of water and you drop one drop into the ocean, that one drop becomes the entire ocean, because you can't separate the one drop from the ocean. So I share this with my students. And then when you think about this and you look to Psalm 95, which says, Asher lo hayam, the sea is God's. And I think if water is the manifestation of the divine in the world, and the sea is God's, and Psalm 115 says, V'ha'aretz natan libnei adam, the dry land was given to humans. I ask myself, if the sea is God's, if the water is the manifestation of the divine in the world, how can we sit by and watch as billions of metric tons of sewage is pumped into the ocean every year? How can we stand by and watch plastic by the tons every minute around the world be dumped into the ocean? How can we stand by and just watch the degradation, the overfishing which is taking place? I mean, the pillaging of the ocean. And I see it as a Jew that I have an obligation to do something. The mitzvah of Bal Tashchit. Bal Tashchit is the prohibition against needless waste and destruction. And I look at what humanity is doing to the ocean, to the rivers, to the lakes of the world, and we're destroying it. And to me, our behavior is a violation of the concept of Bal Tashchit. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to raise this awareness and doing it because, we talk about climate change, and it is, there's no question. There is no question what's happening right now. But I think we sometimes get caught up in the perception that climate change is entirely because of fossil fuels. It's not entirely because of fossil fuels. It's because the entire ecosystem, the entire marine ecosystem is out of balance. In its pristine state, where the ocean is healthy, where marine life is plentiful, where we haven't destroyed the shores around the world unnaturally, when the marine environment is in a proper balance, everything else would come into play. Everything else would come into balance. And so no question that greenhouse gas emissions and carbon is a huge contributor, but it's not the only contributor. And I just want to raise that awareness that there's so much more. You know, if you were to sit back right now and take 3 deep breaths, 2 of those breaths are created by the ocean. And it's created by the phytoplankton in the ocean. And the phytoplankton really blooms because of, and forgive the graphic nature, because of the feces of whales. I mean, a blue whale, can defecate 3 tons of excrement in one sitting. And from that comes the phytoplankton, which feeds on that. And from the phytoplankton comes the oxygen. Phytoplankton creates the oxygen. But the blue whale population today is only 1/10 of what it was prior to the era of industrial whaling. Now imagine what the atmosphere would be like had humans not decimated, not just the blue whales, but all of the whales. Imagine what the world would be like right now. And so it's this much bigger picture. And that's what I'm trying to really raise the awareness of.
And Rabbi, you are a very passionate, eloquent spokesperson for protecting the oceans and the waterways and understanding that as a religious mandate. That's why I wanted you to come on tonight. I appreciate
Thank you for having me.
Very much your words and your admonition that we need to do a much better job as a species. And that's what we're all about as Jews, Tikkun Olam. And in your case, you focus in on Tikkun Hayam. I congratulate you and I wish you well and we support you. If there's things
Thank
that
you.
different congregations can do, let us know and we're very interested in working with you.
There are, and actually I'm trying to think, because we spoke the other night late, and I don't know if I sent you what I was supposed to send you, did I?
I don't think so.
Oh no, I'm so sorry, forgive me. I'll do that as soon as we're done.
No worries.
We have a program that we do, and I'm going to admit that because, you know, when it comes to the environment, there are 3 fundamental approaches to the environment. There's the scientific approach to the environment. There's the conservation approach to the environment, and there's the faith-based approach to the environment. What I mean by that is, I mean, we all know what science is. I mean, scientists study the environment. Conservationists are not necessarily scientists, but there are people who love nature, who care about it, who are activists. I mean, environmental activists are not all scientists. Many of them are just passionate individuals who want to make a difference. Faith-based environmentalism is based in the concept that every religious tradition, regardless whether it's Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, Sikh, Baha'i, that every religious tradition sees the natural world as, again, I'll use the word, as divine in one context or another. And they see the divine in nature. And every tradition has that. But when it comes to the marine environment, and Judaism has it, it's clear. Our holidays all revolve around the agricultural cycle. We have holidays like Tu B'Shvat. We have laws about how we harvest our crops and what we leave for the poor and the stranger and the widow. I mean, a lot of our tradition centers around the environment. But when it comes to the marine environment, it's science and conservation. There's almost no faith-based conservation when it comes to the marine environment. In our tradition, on the surface, and this comes back to Torah, in the Torah, water is viewed almost entirely as a purification agent. That's where we have mikvah, that's where we have tashlich, that's where the purpose of water is simply to purify. And as an agent of miracles in the Torah, you know, the parting of the Red Sea, the flood of Noah, the well of Miriam, that's how water is portrayed in the Torah. As I said before, if you want to get a better understanding of water, you have to look elsewhere in our tradition. But so very few faith-based traditions spend much time dealing with water on a deeper level. And so what we're doing, and I'll admit it, it's low-hanging fruit. We're providing easy entry points into raising this awareness. So we've done a program, and I would love for congregation Va-Dor to join us in this. But we have a program. You're familiar with the concept, with the tradition of tashlich, where on Rosh Hashanah, we go to a body of water and we symbolically cast off our sins. So a few years ago, I was teaching some Scuba Jew students about tashlich at Ekkeb College. And one of the students, I love this kid. He was a smart aleck. He was one of those kids that always challenges everything. and he graduated a while back, but I'm still in touch with him because I just love him. He said to me, he said, "Rabbi, you know, there's already more than enough human sin in water. Why don't we take some out instead?" And it was great. And so it led to what we called a reverse tashlich. So on campus, we did a tashlich service. And then because Ekkeb College has this wonderful waterfront property, we went into the mangroves and we went onto the beach and we just removed so much debris that people didn't even notice. They didn't even see it. They walked past it every day and didn't take notice. They didn't see in the mangroves on campus how many plastic water bottles there were, how many snack bags there were. And so I had 5 students and we did a reverse tashlich and it was wonderful. Long story short, this year we're doing our 5th reverse tashlich. And last year, we had grown from 5 students. Last year, we had 170 teams registered to take part in 18 countries, with over 2,000 people going out and removing debris from waterfront locations in their communities. And we're doing it again this year on October 2nd. And I would love to have Va-Dor join us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the suggestion. I'll take it up with the congregation. It sounds like a great idea. You know, they've also speculated that in Greek mythology, you had certain heroes who are able to control certain aspects of nature. One of them maybe could control fire, and the other one water and the land. And it's been speculated that Moses might have emerged from that type of tradition because he seemed to be pretty good with water. And they've noticed that when the Jewish babies were all being killed, Moses was saved by water. He was put into the Nile, and then that saved him, and then he was picked up by Pharaoh's daughter. Then later on, as you mentioned, he made the seas part, and he also got water out of a rock. He hit the rock, and water came out, and he seemed to have a lot of magical qualities when it came to water. And then, of course, he also used water to then drown the Egyptians and to let the Jews emerge victorious. So,
well, the Torah even says that's his name, Moshe, drawn from the water.
There it is, drawn. It means to be drawn out of.
Yeah.
Correct. So some people think that Moses was a superhero who was able to control water. I just have one other question I wanted to ask.
The original Aquaman.
Right, he's Aquaman. And the word water is interesting because in Hebrew it's a dual form. Mayim is dual. Most words are either singular or plural, but there's certain things that come in twos and they have a dual form, like ayin is einayim, ozen is ear, oznayim, ofen is a wheel, ofanayim is 2 wheels, and so yad and yadayim. So things that come in pairs have this ayim at the end of it, even shamayim. And the word for water is mayim, which is a dual form. Some people think maybe that's because our ancestors knew that it's comprised of H2O. Maybe that's why it comes in a dual form. It's just kind of interesting that you have mayim, and then you also have shamayim, which means the heavens. And the Torah indicates that they believed that there was water above and below, and shamayim was a barrier in between both. So you're right, water has very special meaning. But I wanted to ask you something about Kabbalah. In Kabbalah, they have this principle, and it says, Gam ze l'tova. Also, this is for the good. And basically what it does is it says that whatever happens is according to God's will, and it's all for the good. So you should learn to accept things because Gam ze l'tova, that's also for the good. And they use as an example, like the destruction of the temple. Some of the Kabbalists, like Ekkeb, was supposed to have laughed at the destruction of the temple. Why are you laughing? Gam ze l'tova, that's for the good. How could the destruction of the temple be for the good? Well, the temple was destroyed, and then Jews got scattered, and now we are able to teach Judaism throughout the world. Some have even said Gam ze l'tova for the Holocaust, which I find abhorrent, and others do too. Well, if it wasn't for the Holocaust, there wouldn't have been an Israel. The Jews wouldn't have established Israel. The nations of the world decided to create Israel. I find the concept to be abhorrent, but it is a basic staple of Kabbalah. I was just wondering, Rabbi, what your thoughts are about this concept, Gamze L'Tova. Do you
We have the
ascribe to
same,
that?
yeah, we have the same concept in English.
Right, but
in
do
our
you
culture.
ascribe to
Our
it?
our culture is every cloud has a silver lining.
But do you accept that everything that happens is part of God's will and therefore it's okay?
No, I don't see it as God's will. Again, I see everything as coming from free will. So everything that happens to me, it's not that it's God's will that it happens. It's how do I address the circumstances that I'm confronted with? And I can wallow in my misery, or I can say, it's okay. It's okay. I can deal with it. Move forward. I don't see that as God's will. I see it as the command to me. The command to me to find that, to use an English idiom, to find the silver lining in every cloud. So whenever anything happens, yeah, Gamze L'Tova. To turn the bad into good doesn't negate the bad, but how I through my free will respond to the bad is the issue. I don't
What
believe
about
that
something like the Holocaust? You wouldn't say Gamze L'Tova, would you?
No. No, of course not. I would never say that.
All right. Anybody have any other questions or comments that they'd like to raise? It's been a fascinating discussion, but I hope that this will be more than just an intellectual discussion. This will be permanently on the Va-Dor website, and I hope this will be seen as a call to action. Rabbi Rosenthal is extremely eloquent and passionate and knowledgeable and spiritual in calling for a spiritual transformation of the religions of the world to protect creation and to protect creation as it is coming out of the oceans. We have a lot of work to do. He has a very high bar for us to rise to. And I hope that we as a congregation, as individuals, will respond to his plea and recognize the need as Jews and as human beings to take strong action to reverse some very ominous trends and to try to protect our waterways. I thank you very much, Rabbi Rosenthal, for being with us and also for what you're doing to enlighten people and educate people and call people to action to protect our water.
Well, thank you for letting me join you tonight. It's really been a pleasure. I've enjoyed it very much. So thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Rosenthal, for taking the time out of your busy schedule and really sharing with us. And I look forward to some of the paperwork about October 2nd. And
Very
thank
good.
you, Rabbi Barry, for leading this program. And I thank all the attendees and all the future attendees that will see it on the YouTube. So thank you for doing what you're doing, Rabbi Rosenthal.
Thank you.
Our
Thank you.
kippahs are off to you.
Yeah, yes, our hats are off, our kippah, and yashar koach. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.